NTT Data describes itself as an innovator delivering technology-enabled services and solutions. A partly owned subsidiary of Japan's NTT, which is the world's fourth largest telecoms company, NTT Data employs around 100,000 professionals in over 50 countries, providing services via consulting, applications, infrastructure, and business process engineering. It's also heavily committed as a global citizen when it comes to delivering on the SDGs, with specific strategies relating to social, environmental, and governance policies. Now, it addresses those issues through its own business activities as well as through corporate attention to SDG 17, which is engaging in partnerships for the global goals. One example of this has been NTT Data's Singapore operations' recent decision to join the Microsoft Enabler program in Asia Pacific, which supports diversity and inclusion in the workplace. NTT Data's Singapore MD is Krishnappan Ramanathan, and he sat down with me to discuss the company's approach and activities relating to sustainability and the SDGs.
NTT Data has started this journey in 2 decades before, early 2000. Even though the name of ESG really came up pretty recently, I think more in terms of social responsibility, corporate social responsibility, and also environmental protection is something which we have started to really work on it in the early 2000s. We also believe that IT is a form of really creating a new and affluent society. So we co-work with our clients and with different stakeholders in order to really make the system and the solutions what we provide to make a better living for people and society.
I'm just sort of looking at your mission statement for the company, and it says the mission statement of the group is to use information technology to create new paradigms and values which help contribute to a more affluent and harmonious society, which is very eloquent, but slightly formal. I wonder if you could sort of translate that. What does it mean? What does it mean to an ordinary person sitting around a dinner table?
See, I think the IT systems, what we develop, right, will change the way of how current processor systems, which creates a negative impact or some kind of less potential positive impact on either the global or local environment or community or society, and also use the same IT systems to make sure that there's an ease of use of, so that at least everybody gets benefited by the whole systems what we really put in place.
A lot of your report also talks about the social impact of these policies. How does social impact fit in to the greater strategy? Tell me what the idea is for influencing society here.
All right. I think the social impact is in multiple forms. I really kind of look at in 3 ways of the social impact it can really happen. One is certainly social welfare or employee welfare. I think that's one important thing which we can give. The other one is more in terms of fair trade. Then the third one is more in terms of charitable contributions. I think there are 3 different ways in which I think we really kind of make a social impact. And most of the systems what we really develop or the processes which we follow should really have a fair trade policy. At the same time, we have to create some employee welfares in terms of re-employing people, reskilling, upskilling people, employees, and general social people. At the same time, also, we really look at hiring people with persons with disabilities, diversity and inclusions, and then also contributing in terms of charitable ways to the society to address some catastrophic calamities in this world.
But there is one other thing that stood out in your report that I found was actually a much more interesting element, which I've not heard many people say. The report says NTT will refuse to do any business with antisocial forces. which is a very different way of looking at it and an interesting one. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, I think, in this case of working with antisocial is absolutely a no-no. So there are multiple antisocial engagements which really can happen when we really work with partners, we really work with clients. I think there might really be an unfair kind of nepotism, favoritism, all that could really be part of the play in terms of a trade. I think when we really see that kind of things, we really say no to this kind of a businesses when we really kind of go through. So it goes from every step of our doing business. So for example, if you want to engage partners, we do proper qualification of partners. When we really wanted to really kind of get into working with clients, we really want to see that what is that engagement which we will really have and how transparent and how fair this really can be. And if we really see some kind of unfairness or in terms of no transparencies, we will really kind of walk away from those kind of businesses in the whole aspect. Yeah.
And presumably that also involves people within your own supply chain.
Absolutely.
How do you go about monitoring and policing, for the want of a better word, your own suppliers and the people with whom you do business?
Yes.
What sort of structures and policies do you bring to the process of vetting and making such decisions?
Yeah. So more in every aspect of a deal, every aspect of a partner or a supply chain partner inclusion into our system, we do have a rigorous onboarding process. So we really check in terms of how we really their financial strengths and their capabilities. And same thing, I think it goes through the approval process in the hierarchical structure till we get the final approval from, depending upon the kind of partners which we onboard. I think that's the governance which we really have. At the same way, I think for customers also, when we are really doing a deal, we do really entire 9-yard process of how do we really get into a deal. And then the approval process, depending upon the value of the deal, depending upon the solutions which we provide, and the return to all the stakeholders will be discussed so that can really be approved by the relevant authorities, so that at least we can get to pass through deals with having a deal with a client.
Okay, so I mean, while we're talking about process, tell me about the internal corporate structure of the monitoring process and the implementation and execution of these ideas. How does the sustainability, the ESG, the CSR framework work within the company? Where are those responsibilities positioned and how are they executed? So
yeah, I think this framework of ESG management is as what you must have seen in the earlier report. I think it's quite well laid out, Timur. So one of the senior executives are the chairperson for this ESG management framework, and most of the critical ones really goes through to him in terms of our different activities, in terms of fair trade or in terms of employee or social welfare. And that gets, and most of so we split our global operations into 4 different regions, and Asia Pacific and China, excluding Japan being one region, headquartered in Singapore. So the CEO of APAC China would also be involved in such activity in that particular committee. And then most of the country's MD who follow through the whole structure. So basically, we report into our regional CEO, and the regional CEO reports into the ESG management framework chairman. So that's the way how the reporting structure works, and that's the way how the onboarding processes and the fairness trade discussions are happening.
We touched briefly before on the philosophy and how the company began coming to these ideas. Can you tell me a little bit about how how did the internal process, how was it received by the people with whom you do business and the supply chains that you have and the people, the stakeholders with whom you interact? I wonder if, everybody else in that chain was quick to come on board with the philosophy, or did you find that within your own environments, a lot of people were still resistant to the idea that this kind of thinking was valuable or worthwhile?
Yeah, I think this is really a very important point you touched, Timur. I think it really depends on the society in which we are. So I think different countries, I would really now have to mention about the structural acceptance of ESG in different regions and different countries. So different countries play it differently. For example, especially in terms of Singapore, I really see it. It's pretty easy. And I also see that we go only one in the whole supply chain. Our influence is about only one level down, where with our own suppliers and partners, whereas it really has to really cascade to the second layer or third layer. We have very less visibility. But
how do you define those layers?
All right. For example, if we do have a partner, and if that partner has got another partner, for example, from any other country or remotely there or in Singapore, we might really be having a very less influence or a less visibility on all these things, right? So that's exactly where we have. So we will try to really get to that detail. That's where would really take a bit more longer time. And that is also from an acceptance perspective from our partners would really have some difficulty. So
you're saying that in the Asian context specifically, this is perhaps a bit more difficult to get down through the layers than it would be in Europe, say.
Absolutely, yes, exactly.
Are you seeing that changing much? Are you seeing the appetite growing at all?
Yeah, certainly there is an appetite. It is changing as well because they clearly see that they might lose business if they don't really show up that transparency and the willingness to work in this framework. But certainly they have to gear themselves up before they can really go. So there's a time lag there. That's what is really kind of happening at this point of time, especially in countries beyond Singapore, in some other Southeast Asia countries. I think so the first layer is really picking up speed. So we are still a bit more away in terms of really getting the supply chain aligned. Yeah.
So if that's the case now, given that NTT is obviously doing an enormous amount to make its position clear and influence where it can, how can we change that situation, or how can that situation within the broader Asian context be changed? What do you think is necessary to make more companies and more leaders take that responsibility and align with the kind of values you're proposing?
First and foremost, most of the multinational companies in generally are really practicing this pretty firm right now, and more and more of entities, if they are really starting to adopt this, I think the run of this can really happen pretty fast. The second one is the government. Government plays a very critical role in terms of incentivizing and making things happen for suppliers and the SMEs as well. So I think that is very, very key point. And we also kind of work with government and with different players and create an ecosystem for that. One example I could really give is that in the recent past, we joined hands with Microsoft, SG Enable, which is Singapore Enable, which is a government body here, and a few other NGOs came together and formed a consortium in terms of upskilling, reskilling people, and then hiring people who are in the society who has not found a job or who is really having difficulty in finding a job. So if the ecosystems really come in play like that, this certainly things like this can influence our partners and also the other social impact to really have this adopted quickly.
But again, I guess the same question on a slightly different framing. I mean, how has your experience been with Asian governments and the rate of acceptance amongst the policymakers to take on this agenda?
Yeah, I think in Singapore perspective, they are very proactive. In fact, like more than corporates, I think I've really seen very forthcoming, especially in Singapore. So even a day before, you could really see MAS really launching a grant for green and sustainability linked to loans for SMEs, right? So when they really want to adopt to such kind of things, they can really get loan from MAS and they can start. So this is this is one example. So many of such governments are really coming for Go Green funding or loans, and then start to really kind of bring SMEs and also some of the other larger entities to really kind of subscribe to ESG frameworks. Yeah.
Okay, let's touch on a couple of really practical issues. Give me some examples of the kind of work that NTT is doing that pursues this agenda.
Many of such, like every industry here really adopts ESG slightly differently, Timur. I think let's just take a bit of a public sector right now. Public sector, we kind of look at a lot of different agencies of public sector is going after giving some fund. Recently, NTUC has come out with giving a care fund to their members in Singapore. And then we really help them in terms of building a portal very quickly, in 8 weeks' time, in jointly with Microsoft, and then started to really deliver that system. And it benefits people for getting some social funding from NTUC for their members. So this is one kind of initiative. Same way, we have also done a similar portal in Philippines for foreign workers, so who really need some aid. So we help them to jointly develop something. So these are all some of the areas where we help the society to really get the requirement or need very, very quickly to them in a very short span of time. So in terms of logistics, right, where we use blockchain. Blockchain is a new technology where we kind of use blockchain to promote the more fair trade. For example, one of the global German automotive client of ours, along with some global logistics client, we created a blockchain solution for them to track and trace their spare parts so that there is no fraudulent or a fake spare parts in the whole market. So this kind of a systems is implemented in Malaysia, and also it's going to be going around as a solution in the rest of the Asia Pacific. So this is another use cases for us to kind of talk about a fair trade.
Well, one thing that stood out in your report to me, actually, I saw a headline which was very interesting. I'm not quite sure what it means. It says, it talks about MEF CO2, a project to convert carbon dioxide into renewable energy, which sounded fascinating.
Yeah. So see, there are quite a fair bit of things in terms of environment right now. So environment has got really 2 or 3 things, especially in terms of resource consumption or waste management and land use. So this is related to resource consumption and the waste management here. So in terms of data centers, we really have data centers because we are an IT company. And recently we have developed a green data center in Asia, especially in the country Singapore. So our Serangoon data center is a green data center, which is really developed by NTT Holdings. And then we use that data center for most of our clients and also for our needs. So that's one area where we really see CO2 emissions are much lower. So this is one such example.
So you spoke earlier on about, a number of the companies at the second and third layer of interaction that you deal with that may not, particularly in Asia, that may not be quite as committed or even informed about the philosophies of ESG and CSR and sustainability. But I'm wondering whether perhaps the reason that they are that way is because they simply haven't got the capacity to implement these kind of policies. They don't have, they'll look at a company like NTT and they'll say, well, it's okay for you because you have manpower resources. You can put people to monitor and to create these policies. You've got financial resources where you can turn your own internal operations to more sustainable technologies. But smaller companies don't have those kinds of resources. How can NTT help those companies to begin to understand the value of ESG and CSR policies?
So more in terms of, that's why the ecosystem is very important for all of us. I think the company which has got the philosophy of going through the ESG is very critical, because for the smaller SMEs, right, they really look at their growth, look at their revenue, look at their profitability first. That's where everybody really starts their business with. And when they really want to get to a stage in a growth path, then certainly they have to be embraced by the larger ecosystem, larger stakeholders, right? It could be company like us who are really having a bit more matured framework in terms of ESG, can really kind of bring them on board and then work with them together in terms of migrating them into the next level of the thought process in ESG. At the same time, the ecosystem, what we carry, because we really connect with government and also we connect with other larger players. So we bring them also into the fold so that at least they can also help these kind of smaller companies who can really adopt this and then be part of a bigger, larger ecosystem, to become a part of a larger ecosystem. Yeah.
So how does that ecosystem building process occur? I mean, I know that on an individual corporate level, you can reach out to people and companies and governments that you think will help in particular contexts. Are there any broader platforms? Are there any broader institutions or groupings that are promoting this kind of thinking that you're part of? And do you think, if not, should there be?
Yeah, I think the ecosystems are now getting more prominent. I think we do have a system called Koto Lab. I think this is something which is in the report. You can also kind of have a look. I think there we really have 8 different companies, larger companies coming into play into the life sciences industry, and then providing solutions. So they come from different walks of life within the life sciences. Some of them will produce solutions to life sciences. Some of them will give IT solutions, and some of them really are providing some supplies to the life sciences raw materials. All these are put together, 8 different entities all put together, and then form a larger ecosystem, and then go public to really kind of say, we are really forming this. Whoever are keen to really come on board can come on board. So this is the way of how we really kind of go. So there needs to be an awareness to, in terms of that ecosystem, what we build, and then really kind of get it advertised so as a PR initiative, and then try to really get more companies onboarded into such initiatives, and they will really have some kind of a program to enable people.
So I mean, let me just ask you a similar question from a slightly different perspective, the perspective of a smaller company that wants to make a change. Let's say, for instance, that one of the companies that are perhaps second or third layer down in your supply chain that you don't have immediate contact with on a regular basis. What if one of those companies said, okay, Ram, I really want to be part of this ecosystem. I really want to take some learnings and some value from the things that you're saying and doing. How do companies like that go about joining the ecosystem, getting in touch with NTT perhaps? And do you have a formal process whereby people and companies can come to you and say, help us build our process?
Yeah. At this particular point of time, it is still a push and a pull kind of environment. It is not really a forthcoming where we have a training kind of an ecosystem, or where we really proactively go into the society to really kind of turn companies into ESGs. But mostly the companies whom we partner with, certainly we enable them. And it is going to be more like a push and a pull, where they have interest and where we really have interest. That's exactly where it's going. And if the part of the ecosystem, if they are really coming into that, certainly we will really enable them, not just through our means, through our partner means as well.
All right. Ram, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks very much indeed.
Excellent, Timur. I think it has been a wonderful time, and it's a great session to be with you.
Fantastic.
Today.
Thank you.